Our main speaker today is Eric Anderson. Eric is a chartered financial analyst working in the investment industry, a member of Houston Oasis since the second meeting. He is married with 2 children and loves the outdoors, camping, hiking, and snowboarding. And oh yeah, he's the president of the Houston Oasis Board of Directors. Today, he's going to be reflecting back on his time 3 years as the president of the board. Let's welcome Eric Anderson.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Jesse. I guess I should start by apologizing. My title was a little bit formal and ambiguous. I guess a little bit clickbaity almost. I had a lot of people come up to me this morning and say, "You're leaving us? Where are you going? What's happening?" No, it's just my farewell address. I'm stepping down as president. I've been president for 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not sick. I wasn't really sure what else to call this thing, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody, for coming. So I've been president for over 3 years. There's no requirement right now that I step down. There's no term limit currently on the presidential position. But I feel like 3 years is a good time to transition into new leadership. 3 years was the amount of time that my predecessor, Gary Williams, took to be president. And there's really 2 reasons why I feel like 3 years is the right time, especially for me to step down. And the first one is that being president of Houston Oasis is actually a lot of work. It can be a bit stressful at times. It can be a bit taxing on people. As far as the day-to-day responsibilities, I think it's not the most involved position that we have time-wise. I think the treasurer's role probably requires the most day-to-day hour requirement. But it is the position that everybody looks to and requires leadership whenever there's a crisis, which adds a considerable amount of stress and time requirement for it. So after 3 years of dealing with, I think we've had more than our fair share of crises at Houston Oasis. Hopefully no more in the future. I am a little bit burned out, so it's time to transition on to some fresh blood, somebody to come at it with a lot more energy than I've got left in me right now. And the second reason is that I think our organization deserves to have a fresh perspective and fresh leadership from time to time. Someone who is a leader, even if they're a good leader, they're usually not good at everything, and I certainly am not. And so it's good to kind of transition into new leadership so that you can get a new skill set into the organization, and maybe we can address some of those deficiencies or areas where perhaps I was not giving the necessary attention to. So I think it's a very positive thing. I think it's going to benefit the organization to be transitioning into some new leadership. So let's talk about what the president is and what the president does at Oasis, because I'm still learning what that is. If you read the bylaws of our organization, I know some of you have, you'll know that the president really doesn't have any special authority outside of a regular board member. The board of directors is the governing body of Houston Oasis. They make all the decisions by vote, and the president gets just 1 vote, just like all the other board members. However, the president does set the agenda and lead all of the discussions. So it requires a different kind of leadership. It is the president's responsibility to set the direction of the organization, but in theory, you could have a board that turns on you, that doesn't agree with your direction, that decides they want to go somewhere else, and the president doesn't have any special authority to enforce their vision. So it requires that the president be persuasive, that they be collaborative, and they be willing to compromise with their board in order to achieve what they want to achieve. And I think that's the way it should be. It's worked very well for Oasis, and I think it should continue that way. It's important that the president not try to lead by force, and that the president have an understanding of what the Oasis movement is. And that's still something that I think is largely ambiguous. We are a first-of-a-kind organization. To my knowledge, there's nothing else outside of the other Oasis chapters that exists quite like we do, that fills that gap in between people transitioning out of religion into more secular, different communities. We are a free thought organization. It's in our name, Houston Free Thought Community, and it is the president's responsibility to understand what this means and to help make sure that the organization is staying on that path. So when I took over as president, I really had 2 broad categories of thoughts about my role. The first one is the obvious one. I was thinking about direction, I was thinking about growth, I was thinking about what we wanted to achieve as an organization, how we could reach out to more people who would be interested in joining an organization like Houston Oasis. I was thinking about growing the future, but I was also thinking about threats. And I want to talk a little bit about those because those are important, and a lot of people don't think about that. It's not the fun thing to think about. It's fun to envision the future of the organization, get excited about it, but threats are very real. And when you hear threats, what most people think of is they think of external threats. They think of maybe there's some crazy Christian organization that would like to see us go away, or maybe there's individuals outside of the group who don't like what Oasis is doing. Those are threats. Those are real threats, and we should consider them. However, at least while I've been president, those have not been the threats that we've dealt with. All the threats we've dealt with have been internal threats, and I categorize those into two groups. And this one we haven't dealt with, but it's one that we need to be ever vigilant on so we don't have to deal with it, and it's financial impropriety. I think a lot of people might be shocked to hear that because you believe, just like I do, that this is a moral group of people with moral leadership and good values. So why should we be concerned about financial impropriety? I think it would be naive to believe that just because we left religion, we left all the problems of religion behind. If you're like me and you don't believe in God, then there's nothing separating the problems of religion from the problems that we could potentially have because we're all humans. And it's important that we take steps to proactively guard against financial impropriety for two big reasons. The first one being that all of your donations should go towards the betterment of our organization. We are the stewards of your donations. It's our responsibility to make that. But the second one is that we are still a young and relatively small organization, and a financial impropriety scandal at this early stage in our growth could potentially destroy us. No question about it. It could break our trust with the community. It could paint us in a bad light. And so the things that keep me up at night, especially since I work in the investment industry, I think about financial impropriety. And as president, I took steps to try and guard against that. So I instituted our own accounting standards and practices. I worked very closely with the treasurer to make those. I required that at all board meetings, a transaction-level treasurer report be presented at the beginning of all of our public board meetings so that all of that information was out in the open. And then I also routinely went through and checked those transactions, logged into the bank accounts to make sure that everything was adding up and everything was correct. And I'm sure Alexis will tell you, I bothered our treasurer more than I probably should, asking questions about every single little transaction to make sure that your donations were being appropriately allocated to the best possible uses in the Oasis organization. I also required that there be 2 signatures on all checks, that all cash donations must have cash receipts, and there must be 2 signatures on all cash receipts. These are pretty simple things, but they are very important when it comes to being vigilant and making sure that we have built the basis of an organization where financial impropriety simply cannot occur. And the second one, the second big category of threats, are failures of leadership. And it goes along the same line. This is anytime somebody in a leadership position, be they a volunteer or a board member or whatnot, violates their trust agreement with the community. To help safeguard against this, we at the board, under my direction as president, have built a more robust and comprehensive code of conduct. This is a document that creates guidelines for all the members of the community, anybody that participates in an Oasis event, how they need to behave to each other in order to participate here. And then we went further than that. We also created a board member code of conduct because we hold our leaders and volunteers at Oasis to a higher standard than we do the general community, to make sure that everyone is behaving in a way not to violate the trust agreement with the group. We also created a volunteer manual so that volunteers at Oasis have a clear direction on how they can make decisions in the best interest of the organization. And I think all of those things worked well, but there's still the concern that at some point we could have a disconnection between the governing leadership body, the board of directors at Houston Oasis, and the community. This has been an ongoing concern of mine. That would be a situation where basically the governing body of Oasis is not acting in the interest of what the community would like to see them do. One of our jobs we're the leaders, we set the direction of the organization, but our job is to go in the direction that the community feels comfortable going in. We can't move outside of the community. You create a disconnect, you create a very unstable system and a potential for collapse. And so I made it mandatory that the board seek community nominations anytime there is an open board seat. I think it's important the community always give their input about who they would like to see as a leader at Oasis, not just the board voting on their friends potentially. I also set the precedent for an annual town hall meeting. We had our first ever town hall meeting last year, and this is an opportunity for any member of the community to come in and directly question the board, either anonymously or stand up and question them directly about what's going on, to get answers to questions they may have, and have the board there to answer those questions, to make sure we have a connectedness between the community and the board. I also made it mandatory that board members rotate on the MC schedule. And I feel like that's important because not everybody knows who the board members are. But if they're up here on Sunday in front of you, you recognize them. You know who you can go to if you have a question. You know who is leading the direction of the organization and who you can talk to and get input on if you have any questions. So let's take a minute and go down memory lane and talk about some of the challenges that we did have as an organization over those 3 years with all those things in mind. Well, first off, we had some safety concerns. We had a number of safety incidents. Of course, I can't get into too much details about that, but we've had members of our community, we've had stalking situations, and we want to make sure that everybody at Oasis feels safe, all right? Nobody should come to Oasis and not feel like they're safe. And so we have created what's called an emergency response plan. And we've also made it mandatory that all board members attend a once-a-year emergency response training. And this is a pretty comprehensive document that covers a large variety of things from medical emergencies to actual threats of violence and how we should respond those in the right way. And then, one of the other big challenges we saw, and we saw it unfortunately more times than I would like, is we kept having to change locations. We used to be at Tracy G Community Center, and after a while, the leadership of Tracy G came and said, we're not going to lease out to anybody on Sundays anymore. And it was under very suspicious circumstances. Personally, I do feel like we were being discriminated against there. I think that there were ideological differences. And then the same thing happened again when we were at Castillo Center, which was a great location. It was a more central location in Houston, and much more convenient for a lot more people to come. Well, the exact same thing happened. After a while, I think they kind of recognized our organization, what it's about. They didn't necessarily agree with it, and they said, we're just not going to lease to anybody on Sundays anymore. And one of the ways that we can try and safeguard against that, I think, is to open up more of a dialogue and be more proactive about taking steps to get to know and understand the leadership of the people leasing buildings to us. And I think we have a great relationship with the staff and leadership of Baker Ripley right now. So hopefully we have mitigated that risk. And then one of the big challenges I think we saw was a largely unexpected challenge. It was Hurricane Harvey. And that was a challenge not only for the organization, but for the individuals of our organization and for the city at large. Like many of you, I sat inside my home for days, trapped, watching the rain come down, watching the water rise, not knowing if the water was going to come into the house and destroy everything I had, and I felt completely powerless. And I didn't like that. And I wanted to do something about it. I wanted human hands to solve human problems. So before the rain even stopped, we began organizing an Oasis relief effort. And we started with Jesse Hudgens building us a special website that allowed us to post available resources for people who were in need. It also allowed people who had needs to come in and tell us about those needs so we could try and get those things met. And then it also allowed people to make donations to a Houston Oasis Harvey Relief Fund. And it worked out tremendously well. We were able to identify needs in members of our community, people who had lost homes. We were able to find them places to stay. We had members of our community generously opening up their homes to complete strangers, to people they had never met before, letting them in, giving them a place to stay, because they knew they had nothing else. They had no other options. We arranged rides for people who had lost their cars. We made grocery deliveries for people who had no ability to get food themselves. We got donated clothing and basic necessities for people who had lost everything. And all of this was occurring before the waters had even receded. And once the water finally did begin to recede, we put the word out that Houston Oasis, a secular, free-thought community, was here to help anyone who needed it. And we made a promise that we were not going to turn anyone away, that anybody that came to us for help, we were going to see to it that they got it. And we did exactly that. Our first challenge was the materials for cleanups and for restoration were very difficult to locate. All the hardware stores in Houston were sold out of the basic necessities that you need in order to make a cleanup of a flooded home. And so Alexis Potaman arranged with her friends in Austin to have fans and cleanup materials and vacuum cleaners and everything that we needed brought in from Austin so that we could use these materials for cleanups. And we partnered with other organizations to try and get even more work done. Houston Oasis became a name that many volunteer organizations in Houston were suddenly aware of. They knew if they needed something, they could call Houston Oasis and they would probably get it. And this is true for organizations like Austin to Houston Relief, which did a lot of cleanups in the area and helped a lot of people. I was on the phone with them almost daily, coordinating material movements, coordinating volunteer movements, coordinating resources to try and get as much good work done as we could. We also partnered with the Mormon Church, ironically. There's a branch of the Mormon Church called the Mormon Helping Hands. It was being headed up by one of the local stake presidents, and he got in touch with me at one of the cleanups because he saw our group working, and he said, how can we work together? How can we get more work done? And I said, we're happy to work with you. So we coordinated volunteer events, and we shared information with each other, and we shared materials with each other to try and get as much done as we could. We put our ideological differences completely aside. If anybody knows, I am an ex-Mormon myself, so there are certainly ideological differences there, but we put that aside in the interest of helping people in need. We also activated the community groups because we wanted to find out what the needs of our community was. And it was not feasible for us to go through the phone book, so to speak, and just call every single person in the community and check on them. So we have in place these community groups where 90% of the community is a member of a community group. Well, let's have the leaders of those individuals' community groups call the individual members of their community group and then relay back to us exactly what the needs are so we can allocate resources to them to get the problem solved. In the end, Oasis volunteers did 18 different cleanups around the city. We raised over $20,000. We raised more money than we needed for all the materials and all the supplies to help everyone. And so with the leftover money, we started a grant program. We had an emergency board meeting where we quickly came up because we knew people needed money quick, people who had uninsured losses, who had no cars, who had no houses. They need money for groceries, they need money for bills and rent, etc. We had an emergency meeting where we came up with a process so that anybody inside or even outside of the community could apply for a grant from us, and we awarded grants up to $1,000. And we gave them their checks in days. As soon as they came in, we as the board immediately evaluated it, decided how much money we could afford to give them, and we said, you know what, you can get your check in days. Just come, we'll write it to you, no strings attached. It's up to you how you spend it. That was the Houston Oasis grant writing program, and that's how we drew down the remainder of our donated relief funds. And I know personally a lot of families in Houston Oasis who used that money to pay for rent while they were waiting for a new place to live, who used that money to pay for groceries, used that money to make a down payment on a car because maybe they only had minimum insurance on their car that was completely flooded. So I'm very, very proud to say that I know that money went towards extremely good use. Well, after Harvey, that was about 3 years. At that time, I had been president for about 3 years, and I was pretty exhausted, so I decided it was time for me to step down. And I talked to Mike about it. Mike is our former executive director. I told him what I was thinking. I said, I feel like 3 years is a good amount of time. And he said, don't step down just yet. Hang on a little bit longer. Hang on another 6 months or so. Because I would like to put some things in place for replacing you and whatnot. And I said, okay. I'll hold on a little bit longer. And I continued remaining president, and it was getting towards the end of that time period where Mike had said I could step down, so I once again started putting plans in place to step down. And then I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. And this was on a Thursday. I picked it up, and I heard something very troubling. I heard a rumor of an accusation of sexual impropriety in the leadership of Houston Oasis. And this was from someone who, unfortunately, did not have a lot of details. They didn't have any names. They just told me what they had heard, an unsubstantiated rumor, and I promised them that I would investigate. So I brought Alexis in. Alexis is very connected to the community, and I thought she might be able to help me, and her and I launched an investigation. And let me give you an idea of just how fast things changed. So it was Thursday when I heard the rumor. Alexis and I began investigating. By Friday, we were able to substantiate the rumor, and we asked the victim involved to give us a formal written complaint so that we could take action. Saturday, we received that complaint, and on Sunday, I confronted Mike, our executive director, and asked for his resignation. In the course of just over 36 hours, I went from being ready to step down to now being head of an organization without an executive director and without its founder. And I knew that this was going to be the biggest challenge that the Oasis movement had ever faced. I knew that it was going to require me to stay on longer. I knew that there were going to have to be big changes that would have to be made to the way the organization was led and structured. But I knew that it was the right thing to do, and I knew it had to be done. So we called an emergency board meeting on Monday, and we decided it was important, it was critical, that we give this news to the community first. That night, after our emergency board meeting, all of us got on our cell phones and started calling members of the community so they could hear it from us directly, not from some statement on the website, not from some email that comes out, but from us. And they could ask us their questions, and they could be reassured that Houston Oasis was going to survive, and not only survive, we were going to thrive. So we were an organization without an executive director, and the executive director took care of a lot of things. So it required a total change in the way that we would structure all of that different things. The executive director was our liaison to Baker Ripley. The executive director organized all of the different events. The executive director set up and organized all the different speakers, and the executive director was the MC for everything. So in the beginning, I took on all of those responsibilities until we could put in place a system to replace the old model. And the system we came up with, I'm very proud of. We now have a speakers team, a team of individuals dedicated towards identifying speaking talent and bringing it into Oasis so we can have high-quality Sunday gatherings, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. And I also asked the board to do something that we'd never done before. I asked them to allocate a budget of $24,000 a year to the Speakers Committee, because I thought, and I still feel like, the best way to grow Oasis is to grow the quality of the Sunday program. So we now have a nice big budget we can work with to bring in high-quality speakers at Oasis. And this is also when I instituted the policy of having board members rotate on the MC rotation. So before I close, I'd like to take a minute to talk about future threats. Some things that I think should be on everybody's mind because they are things that could potentially come in and disrupt the organization. They are questions that we all need to be asking ourselves, and they're things that I haven't covered previously. We are a free thought community, and we say that a lot, but I don't think we've really taken the time to think about what that means. That means we believe in the core values, and it means we have the code of conduct, and that's it. We don't support ideology. We don't support political policy, and we don't advocate activism. I know, especially since the election, a lot of us are very active, and I encourage that. I encourage you to use that activism for good. I encourage you to partner with other activist organizations who are at the forefront of making those changes you want to see achieved. But I do not believe that Houston Oasis is the right place for that to occur. We are a place for people transitioning out of religious community. We need to be an open and welcoming organization with no strings attached. No belief. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to see the support. I know there's a lot of different opinions on the topic. If we attach strings, if we attach activism or a belief in a certain political policy, no matter how good it is, because I'm sure we could go around the room right now and we could all agree on certain things that we all want to see achieved politically. We are no longer a free thought group. We are no longer a welcoming organization to people transitioning out of religion, which is something I don't think exists anywhere else. It's something that this macro trend, this trend that we have seen for years and years and years of the decline in religion, people searching for something to replace that. They want that community. We can be that community. We can continue to be that community. What does free thinking mean? Well, I think free thinking is not determined so much by what you believe. You can believe whatever you want, obviously, and still call yourself a free thinker. It is determined by how you arrived at those thoughts. Free thinkers are the most fun people to talk to about politics, about anything, because they've thought about these things. They didn't inherit their beliefs from someone else. They didn't just take a talking point that they heard. They've really taken the time to decide what it is they want to believe, what it is they support, and oftentimes they'll come up with new and creative solutions to old, stale problems that we've all kind of heard the canned Republican or Democratic answer to. I have a test. This is a personal test. You don't have to use it, but I have a test for evaluating someone as a free thinker, and it goes like this. Tell me what you think about immigration, or about abortion, or about gun control, or about anything, but tell me one thing. Just tell me one thing. And from that one piece of information, what can I guess about what else you believe? My level of accuracy in far as inferring your other beliefs from that one piece of information is inversely proportional to how much of a free thinker you are. There are large collections of ideas. There's large collections of ideas that mostly come from political parties, right? If you are pro this, then the political party makes you anti this. And these ideas aren't necessarily related to each other. I don't believe there's any direct relationship between immigration and gun control, right? Yet these ideas get packaged together, and it's because people aren't thinking freely about it. They're buying into a group of ideas, into more of a social movement, than they are truly evaluating these things on their own. So I would say be careful not to let Oasis lose its free thought principles and become just another activist organization, of which there are many. With that, I want to say it's been my pleasure being your president for the past 3.5 years. I've sincerely enjoyed every moment of it. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be on the board. I'm still going to continue supporting Oasis, but thank you very much. Thanks. With that, I would like to introduce the new president of Houston Oasis, someone I am very excited is going to be taking over leadership, Alexis Potaman.
Thank you, Eric. I've been a member of Houston Oasis for over 5 years, and I honestly can't think of a better leader than Eric has been. He has been fantastic. He has led us through a lot of crises and a lot of good times, too. So I am going to miss your leadership, and please do not go anywhere. When Eric first approached me about being president, I scoffed. I honestly had not ever considered being president. When he first told me he was thinking of stepping down and then the mic thing happened, I was like, well, Eric's going to be president for the next couple of years. I think of myself as a good, solid B-level leader, like a worker bee, not the leader. But Eric asked me to think about it. He said, whoever ends up being the next president of Oasis needs to have a vision for the future. I went home, I thought about it. I didn't really think I had a vision. Maybe sort of had a vision, it was hazy. I knew I want Oasis to grow, and I still dream of the day that we have our own 24/7 building, but I wasn't quite sure that was an actual vision. After some encouragement from my husband, Gosha, he said, with time, that vision's gonna become clearer. Zoom in the camera, honey. You're going to want to capture this. You were right. It was actually during our interviews for the open board positions that my vision became a lot clearer. First off, I want to thank everyone who we interviewed. There are so many talented, amazing people who make Oasis happen. There's so many amazing people we interviewed, and even more that we weren't able to interview. Everyone who shows up on Sunday morning, a bar night, camping trip, or even just the volunteer events, you are what make Oasis Oasis. Those of you who take pictures, print the bulletins, read the stories to the kids, you're what makes it a community. And my vision really is just that, a community. To some of us, Oasis is the only place that we can truly be ourselves, where we can find connection with others and where we feel like we belong. Whatever else Oasis is, or whatever role it fills in your life, it is first and foremost a community. Like Eric said, Oasis has seen several ups and downs. We've been through leadership changes, losses, and new beginnings, and yet the friendships and connections I've made here are some of the deepest connections I've ever made. My vision for Oasis is to focus on the community aspect and make it a place where people can develop and strengthen those authentic connections. There are people in the room here today, people who come periodically, who strongly identify as atheists. There are people who identify as believers. There are people who simply identify as themselves. And the fact that we can all come together and find connection in our shared humanity, that's what makes us a community. We're a community of human individuals coming from all backgrounds looking for that connection. How do we continue to encourage genuine connections and strengthen the existing ones? These are the questions I'm really excited to tackle with the new board going forward. I'm so excited and nervous as all get out to follow in Gary Williams and Eric Anderson's footsteps and lead Oasis to move forward into a new chapter. And I really want y'all to be excited too. Last summer, we had our first ever town hall, and we implemented a lot of the ideas that were generated during it. Every year, the board does a planning retreat to kind of plan out what our goals are for the future for the coming year. And I'm looking forward to working with our new board and I plan on holding another town hall and really bring the community into the plans and the vision that the board has for the future. I want everyone to leave here thinking of what Oasis means to you, what community looks like to you. As Jesse said, our solstice party is coming up on Saturday, 6:30 p.m. I want you to come and I want you to be excited and I want you to have this grand vision for the community as we move forward. I'm really grateful for this opportunity and I'm excited for the future and I hope everyone else is too. Thank you.